a little tangent with in my YouTube recommendations for a while, car physics in video games. So I've titled this presentation Cars, Physics, and Games. There's more than you think, because really, there is. There's a lot more than you'd expect. So let's start off with the basic question, what is a car? Come on, if you don't know what a car is, I'm not sure you're from our century. They're everywhere in the real world, but they're everywhere in video games as well. We've seen them from Mario Kart to that's Grand Theft Auto there. There's Forza, and even something like Rocket League, which Miles just brought up. These games are all about cars, but they're all so different. How come? Well, it turns out that it all comes down to one big decision. Are you going to make your game arcade or simulation? And by arcade, I don't mean arcade games. I mean arcadey in style. Something that's cartoonish is another good descriptor for that. So let's break down what I mean. In an arcade car game, your controls are intuitive. When you turn your stick to the left, your car goes to the left. But what that means is we potentially take logical leaps. I'm sorry if you hear that big, loud noise. I have a water softener in my basement. We potentially take logical leaps. Sometimes cars do things that they shouldn't be able to do. Sometimes we drift strongly around corners when a real car wouldn't do that. Sometimes we stop on a dime. But most importantly, arcade games have a shallow learning curve. They're super simple
Those
in
on my
their...
end too.
Oh,
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 that was a big lag.
that was a
You cut out
big,
for like 15 seconds.
yeah.
oh, geez. What did we miss?
You
I
were
heard
just
arcade.
talking about logical leap. You were just starting to
You're
talk
saying,
about logical
you're
leap.
saying the word logic leaps.
Okay,
The words. And then it kind of...
So in an arcade racing game or an arcade car game, cars tend to do things that a real car normally wouldn't. Think about Mario Kart, where you drift around corners, you build up a speed boost, and then you rocket off into the sunset. You can leap your car into the air slightly, and those are things that you can't normally do when you're driving. Most importantly, though, arcade car games have a shallow learning curve. They're easy to get into, and they can be described as cartoonish. On the other side of our spectrum, we have simulation games, which are much more immersive in their control schemes. You have the same amount of control or leverage over the car than you do in a real-life car. They're much more grounded in realism and try to create cars in a simulated way, where all the pieces of the car are being mathematically or physically simulated to create an experience that's almost one-to-one with being in real life. They generally have a much more steep learning curve because you have to understand how to control the beast that is a real car, and they're a lot more complicated. If that didn't quite make it through what an arcade or simulation game is, I have stolen this diagram from a different slideshow where we see that arcade and simulation is more of a spectrum. Over on the left, on the arcadey side, we have Mario Kart, of course, one of the great examples that people think of when they think of arcade car games. And over on the other side, we have games like Forza, iRacing.com, which I'm actually not sure what that is. And in the middle, we see that there's a sort of mid-boundary, because it's not a one or the other. It's more of a spectrum. You can decide how much you want to lean into that arcade or simulation portion. And so, sort of for the rest of the talk, I'm going to stay in the left side of the simcade genre, because that's where I feel most comfortable, and I think that's where a lot of the fun can come out of making cars and games. So speaking of making a car, why don't we just go through and make a car? So I'd like to recall mechanics as a concept. No, not the guys that work on cars, because that's us. Mechanics are the building blocks of games. In general, you can think of them as being made up of rules. A rule is a simple, single concept that can affect the game world. An example I have here is that a platform moves horizontally. And if we combine that rule with another rule that if this platform hits a wall, it switches directions, we now have a mechanic, which is the moving platform. Other rules that the moving platform might have is players can jump through the bottom, players will land on the top, maybe certain enemies fall off of it, and all of these rules come together to create a single cohesive mechanic. the complexity of mechanics comes with these interactions of these rules. So like I was saying. So let's start with nothing, as you should. This is a car. It's our mechanic. What should a car do? Well, obviously, a car should move. Now, I have this slide split into two sections because there's different sort of schools of thought of how to move your car around based on what genre you're making your car in. With an arcade game, or an arcadey style game, usually your chassis and your whole car is made up of a single rigid body object, assuming that you want physics involved, which is what this session's all about anyway. And you manually push that car around. So you just say, I have my car here. You guys can't see the thing I'm holding, so I'm not going to do a physical demonstration. I have a car. I'm going to apply a force forward, and now my car moves forward. Generally, in an arcadey title, the wheels are only there for aesthetic. They don't actually serve a purpose in the greater game. On the other side, we have simulation, where we have our simulated wheels. Instead of having a single object that represents our car, we now have our chassis and then 4 wheels, or however many wheels the vehicle has, that turn based on things like gear ratios, the engine's RPM, and the friction of those tires turning against the ground pushes the car forward. And as an aside, there is a middle ground, and we call those Simcade physics wheels, because simulation is hard. Trust me, I tried to code a simulated car a while ago, and it didn't go that easily. On the other hand, Simcade makes that process much easier, because we replace the simulation with math. Instead of simulating an engine or the tires actually spinning against the ground, we just decide, how fast do you think the tires should be rotating? And we from that, come up with a force that the tire would be giving against the ground based on the mass of the car pushing down, that rotational rate, and the friction of the tire. It gives greater control over what your car is doing because you're no longer depending on what your simulation outcome is. Simulations can be often unpredictable. I'm sorry if you guys can hear that. Simulations can be often unpredictable, leading to outcomes that are hard to work with and hard to tune. If we take out some of those variables, we can create almost an independent, isolated tire simulation. As a implementation sort of detail, in Unity, there's the function rigidbody.addForce at position. Since the car is touching the ground at the point of contact with the tire, we're going to want to add force at that point of contact. So, in order to make a Simcade car, all you really need to do is determine in engine where the car's wheels are touching the ground, how fast that wheel's turning, and flip that into a forward force at that point on the tire. So, this is our car now. It moves forward. Ta-da! Congratulations, we have made a car. This is the end of the presentation, so everyone can go home. Psych! That's not the end, because that's not the best it can be. Because my friend Excel Gum Container over here also made a car. I'm going to ask everyone in this call, which of these two cars do you prefer? The one on the top is the one we made, and the one on the bottom is the one that the Excel Gum Container that was on my desk made. Does anyone have a preference?
I'm sorry, but I think the Excel Gum Container has you beat here.
Exactly. So why were they so different? They were just cars after all. Let's break down what the cars were doing. With our car, when I hit the gas, we move right at 1 meter per second. And when I hit the brake, we stop. With the Excel Gum Container's car, when I hit the gas, it accelerates to the right at 1 meter per second. And when I hit the brake, we stop the wheels and slide to a halt. And at all points, we hold up the body with shocks to create a bit of shakiness as it moves back and forth. Or in layman's terms, that car had juice. And juice is important because it makes our game mechanics feel good. Here's a diagram breakdown of what our mechanics looked like. They're both cars, but our car is just made up of a simple movement rule. Their car, instead, has the rule that their chassis is simulated separate from the wheels, and the wheels hold the chassis up with shocks, and the wheels move the car forward. There might be more, but it's not more complicated. In the end, these are just rules. The chassis is a simulated object. The movement is driven by the wheels. The wheels push up on the chassis with shock springs. So how do we improve our car to make it just as good as the Excel gum containers? Well, we can ask questions to ourselves. We can ask things like, what do the players want? What do the players expect? What would be the most fun for our game? We could also dissect what other games are doing. Take a deeper dive and look at how their things come together, what makes them tick, what are they doing differently, and how can we adopt that? You can iterate on your own design, and that's what that diagram on the right there is. And we can play test, and that's probably one of the most important things, because in the end, it really is about delivering a good experience to the player, and we never know what experience to the player is going to be until we give it to them. So let's answer those questions I posed in the last slide. What do our players want? Our players want to go fast. That's easy peasy. What do our players expect? They expect a car that handles smoothly, right? And what would be the most fun? Frickin' epic tricks. So, let's tackle that first one. It should be easy enough, right? We have our car. Our rule is to move. Let's adjust that a bit. Now our rule is to move fast, right? Well, what happens if we crank that speed up? In a simulation game, the tires slip and the car burns out. And in an arcade game, the car goes too fast for players to react. And that makes a sad car. So as it really turns out, players aren't actually good at driving. Driving requires a quick reaction time. It requires hairpin turns. There's other cars and obstacles on the road that the player needs to avoid. And really, the average person is just not a stunt driver, and they're not capable of performing the feats that traveling at fast speeds requires. But they still want to feel like they are a stunt driver. So the question is no longer, can we make it? It's now, can we fake it? And the answer is yes, we can. One of these tricks I'm about to show you is from Saints Row 4, I believe. Here's a screenshot of two side-by-side images. They're taken from the exact same location, exact same everything. All they did was tweak the field of view from the camera. On the left, we have a lower field of view. And you see the building in the distance looks like it's pretty close, especially compared to how far away it goes when we crank our field of view up to 50, which is around where it normally is. Field of view accentuates distances because it shows us more of what's nearby. When you have a lower field of view, things look closer. So on the contrary, if we have a higher field of view, things look much, much farther away. You can tell because you can't even see the top of this structure in the background in this first 50 field of view screenshot. But when we crank it all the way up to 100, it's dwarfed in the background of the frame, and we can see a lot more of what's beside us. So what does that mean for games? Or car games, sorry. Let's take a look at a regular field of view car driving. As a side note, this car is driving at 100 miles per hour, I believe, maybe kilometers per hour, through the city in Saints Row 4. It might look choppy, but that's because it's a GIF. It's pretty slow, and it doesn't look like it would be that much fun to drive. Let's go and crank that field of view outward. Let's pull the camera back and show the player more of what's in their surroundings and push things that are in the distance farther back. The car is going to be driving at the exact same speed. The car is going to be following the same path. The only thing we've changed is the field of view. And look at that difference. Suddenly, you're racing through a tunnel. And yet, we're not going any faster. The player is still able to react in the exact amount of time that they had before, but they feel like they're driving like a maniac. So this is what we had, when in actuality what we needed was to play with the camera. So now our car mechanic is a bit more complicated. We're no longer just moving the car, but we're touching the camera. we're going to increase the FOV as the speed goes up. And that's just another rule. As the car's speed increases, so does the FOV. Let's look at the next request from players. We had smooth driving, smooth cruising. But what does it really mean to drive smoothly? I think it means accelerations and decelerations. I think it means gradual or predictable turning. And I think it means that the car should feel alive and part of the world. Acceleration is a key part of simulating something in real life, because in reality, objects don't start or stop moving on a dime. We have an equation here that velocity is acceleration divided by delta time, or is it? No, it's multiplied by delta time. So that's wrong. But instead of setting our car's velocity, we can set a maximum velocity. And by doing that, we'll be able to bring them gradually up to their speed. Now, a car won't just start and then stop like we had in that animation before. It'll react more like the Excel Gums car, where it drove up to speed and then it stopped down. But there is something to note. Acceleration isn't necessarily constant. This is because in a simulation game the engine is able to rotate the tires faster when they're already moving, and that grip is already there. So a car from stop is going to accelerate less than a car that's already going, but a car nearing its top speed is going to accelerate significantly less than a car that's speeding up to its top speed. And this is all some things you can take into account with something called an acceleration curve, which is an item we can expose to the designers, and they will love you forever if you do, because it'll allow them to design cars that are all based on the same car object, but feel really, really different to handle. As an aside note, simulation games do inherently have acceleration and acceleration curves due to the nature of how they work. Here's an example that I stole from a GDC talk about Skylanders superchargers, showing off acceleration curves. Everything about these two cars are identical except for the rate at which they reach their top speed. That top car is much more zippy. It's something you'd find in a sports car, and it reaches that top speed faster. The lower car is something more tanky. It's like a van, and it's something that might be able to sustain an impact. And you can get that feeling just by making it reach its top speed slower. So let's keep building onto our mechanic. We no longer are just moving. We've added on the fact that we're moving with acceleration, and that acceleration is being driven by an acceleration curve. The next thing people wanted, or at least what I think people want, is predictable or smooth turning, ? Because that's an interesting topic, and it can be interpreted in a few different ways. But cars can usually make wide turns in the real world. If you go out into a intersection, you'll notice that the road has a wide berth for cars to make their turns. And they can't really, rotate 90 degrees from a stop. So if you increase that car's turning radius, it's immediately going to feel much more like what the player is expecting it to feel. Not only that, but when a car is going fast or has bad or worn out tires, they're going to slip while going around corners. And that slip can be achieved in simulation games by just decreasing the friction on the tires or just manually pushing the back of that car around. Like I said, simulation games get this for free, but the issue here is that we can really only take a car's turning so far. Because once we tune it to feel like a car, we've done everything we can, really. But there still is one variable we haven't looked at, and that is the position of the camera. This is another clip I've stolen from a GDC talk. This is a rigid locked camera. It's moving everywhere the car is, and it really, really feels unnatural because the camera wouldn't be able to keep up to the car or locked on like that in real life. There'd be at least some kind of a sway from a pole or a drone. It's unbelievable. And so we can replace it with something that this guy called the sprung camera. So instead of directly following a car, what if instead we just try to follow the car the best we can and pull towards the target, which is where the camera should be. And on top of that, we can look ahead based on the car's velocity and turning. This creates a more dynamic camera that shows off the car's movement better and emphasizes it more. This is the after shot, And you can see already, nothing has changed about the car. All we're doing is turning the camera. It feels so much more smooth to turn and go around hills and stop and start. So, let's tack that on to our mechanic. All we're doing is adding another rule. The camera is now following the car with a spring. And it's looking into turns. The last thing people wanted were epic tricks. Because games are about having fun, and I forgot to animate this slide and apparently the next one. What's more fun than doing stunts? So let's add drifting and flips into our game. Drifting is a common feature in arcade and simulation games. You'll find it from Mario Kart, where it's super exaggerated, to something like Gran Turismo, I think, where you can sort of slip your car around corners to more efficiently take a sharp turn. In a real car, back tires slip over sharp corners, especially when you're going fast, and that causes the car to make a faster turn than it normally would. That's because of, what's the word, momentum? The car's momentum is still forward while it's trying to turn around the curve, so the back of the car comes out because the center of mass, the front tires are gripping, the back tires aren't, and it spins. This causes the car to turn faster in the direction of that corner, and it's commonly associated with using the handbrake in video games. There's often a handbrake button that'll make your car slip. As with a lot of these juicy bits, simulation games inherently have this, but we can fake it by using a Simcade tire and turning off the friction on the back tires, or just by pushing the back of the car around as we hit a corner. And so, as with everything else, we're going to tack this onto our car mechanic. When we move, we also have the option to pull the handbrake to stop, and when we do, we'll just apply a drift force if the car is turning. And the last thing we should add is flips. A car can drive off a ramp in our hypothetical game, and when it does, it's going to follow the motion of a projectile. We can calculate the hang time using Newtonian physics equations, and that allows us to determine how fast the car should spin to do some epic flips in the air. So let's say we want to flip 3 times. We just know that we can calculate that the car is going to last 3 seconds in the air, so we know that we need to flip at 1 flip per second. We can add that torque onto the main body of the car, and it's going to do an epic flip and land perfectly, as we can see in this next slide that I stole from the Skylanders talk. Their car jumps off a ramp, and they do this calculation process where they determine how long the car is going to land in the air, and they just make it flip. And it lands perfectly. So let's add that onto our mechanic. The car leaves the ground, so we make it do a flip. I'd like to take a brief moment here, which came a lot faster than I thought it would because I talk fast when I do presentations, and just reminisce, because look how far we've come from our starting mechanic where our car moves, and now we have our car mechanic as this network of rules. The car is able to move, and that movement is made by acceleration. The acceleration is driven by an acceleration curve. The car has a camera associated with it, which follows the car with a spring. The FOV of the camera is tied to the speed at which the car is moving. It looks towards turns. If our car jumps off the ground, it does a flip, and if we pull the handbrake, we'll drift around corners. It's such a nice feeling car now. Our car is almost about to rival the Excel gum containers car. So the slideshow's not quite over, but if we put all of this together, Unity, here we go. We end up with something like this, and I'm not sure how well this is going to run because I do have OBS and Discord going, but this is a demo for car physics that I put together. And in the meantime, I guess I'll look at the chat. That car really accelerated. Nice. Here we go. Where's my button? There we go. Okay. Just ignore what the car did. And look at this. This is a fancy car game. You can see the FOV is pulling out as the car turns. We're drifting around corners. You can tell because the particles that I've put off of the tires. We're able to speed up like that. And I have a toggle here to turn off the FOV effects. There we go. So this is the car without the FOV effects, and you see it's going pretty slow, even though our speedometer says we are going about 100. And if we turn it back on, the camera's going to pull out, and suddenly we're racing through the streets of this city. I've also implemented a bit of that flip mechanic so we can calculate the hang time of the car and make it land in a perfect flip. And this is the kind of thing we can end up with if we just break down our mechanics into simple rules. And I'm going to try to not spend too much time on this, but it is actually really fun to drive around. So that's where we end up when we follow the steps. I guess this presentation was 30 minutes shorter than it's supposed to be, but these 4 GDC talks, which I'm not going to play, were the inspiration for this session. I went down a bit of a rabbit hole, as I said. This one is the one that I stole the Saints Row 4 footage from. This is about the Uncharted 4 off-road car section, which was a really cool talk about vehicle suspension, if that's something you're interested in, as well as friction and how that affects the way a car moves. Skylanders, this talk here, dove a lot more into the arcadey aspects because they settled on a more arcadey solution because the game is meant for kids and is supposed to be much more easy to control. Oh, wait, this is the Saints Row one. And this is more about speed effects and making a car fun to play. And then this one in the top left is a talk about overall vehicle stuff. They're all really great watches if you have the time, and I recommend them all. And now, with that out of the way, a new foe has appeared, a challenger is approaching, and I should probably hand it off to Miles to make a big announcement.
So, the moment you've all been waiting for, we are going to be doing what we're calling a mechanics jam. Do you have the other image, like the image?
I should have. I'm
black?
sorry.
Okay, well.
That's great.
Okay, so we're doing what's called a mechanics jam. Do you want to just pull it up? I think it'll be funnier.
Oh, how do I close the slideshow? Here we go.
Don't worry, we're just doing some live debugging. Don't worry about it. It's fine. So we're doing the mechanics jam. So what the mechanics jam is, and we kind of teased it way back, if you remember back to the AGM, the GDSA AGM, we kind of teased it back then. So what the mechanics jam is, it's kind of like a game jam, except instead of building a whole game around a theme, it's going to be more focused on one specific mechanic over the duration. And so you're going to be given, instead of just one theme, you're going to be given a number of themes, and you have to mix them together to create some sort of mechanic in an interesting way, whether it be the mechanic itself is creative, the implementation could be crazy, whatever you want to do it. So it's similar to a traditional game jam, but with their own little spin on it. The official date for when that's going to be, we're going to release all of this in a text announcement, so don't worry about writing this down, unless you want to. Hey, it's your choice. The official date is going to be the 27th of March to the 28th of March. So instead of doing a whole 48 hours, it's just going to be roughly, not 36, but it's going to start
exactly
on
2 p.m. to on the 27th. Starts at 2 p.m. and then ends at 8 p.m. on the 28th.
Yes, thank you, Anthony.
And yeah, we'll
So-
release all this information afterwards.
We hope to see you all there and hope you're excited. And
Yes.
again, as mentioned, more information is going to be released in text. There will also be a sign-up form so that we can, keep everything organized and keep on the lookout for that announcement.
Also, please don't take this as a memo for people who only like programming. Bring your teams. This is a perfect opportunity for you guys to really get down like juice programming. And I think honestly, I wanted to say this. But I didn't want to interrupt you, Jacob. I think you've lit a fire in me about juice and design mechanics in that particular way of that like network. I think that was really cool. I think this is a really cool opportunity for you to for you guys to bring your teams in and really nail a mechanic. Like, get some art for it, get your artists on some art for it, get your sound people to make really fun sounds for it. Make it feel good. Let your designers play around with values and unity or something, and make some good stuff. It's not just for programmers, so bring your whole team.
Juice is everything.
And of course, that's not to say that if you want to go at it solo, totally fine, same as a normal game jam. And of course, if you don't have any art, that's fine. You can do programmer art. It's totally fine because the focus is on the mechanic, not on the game per se.
Yeah. But we will whip up an announcement soon, along with forms. And yeah, I hope this is a really big event, because I think we all do, because it's actually something we've been working on for a while. And yeah, wonderful session, Jacob.
Thank you.
That's Spratly to you.